because,
Okay, sorry.
Oh, okay. I guess I got it. Yeah. Okay. Any size shawl can fit any size person for some kind of purpose, but with a sweater, generally we do have to fuss a little bit more about fit. Sometimes it's a matter of knitters have done some sweater knitting, and sometimes the results have been mixed. There have been some successes, but maybe some not quite so. And, because it is a big investment, both money wise and time wise, it may make some people a little bit leery. I think one of the biggest things I ever learned about knitting anything, and particularly with sweaters, is when you discover something hasn't worked, to get your frustration out, go beat up a pillow or whatever, think about it put it away for a little bit until you can think about it rationally. Then come back, lay it out, try it on if you need to again, and pinpoint where things didn't go as they should have. And try to determine what were the critical factors. Is the style something that just doesn't work, especially with our figures? And that's the thing that we found. If you've been knitting for a while, our figures change, weight changes, or even if we're the exact same weight we were 20, 30, 40 years ago, it has shifted. And so therefore, lines that were flattering on us before may not be so much now. On the other hand, things that we had avoided because they didn't work as well for us before may now work a little better. The other thing is color selection. Our complexions change a little bit, not as much, but our hair color really can seem to make a difference on what colors work well with us. So sometimes taking a look at your wardrobe in general, what colors are you veering away from or find you're gravitating more towards, in order to, flatter your look. So thinking critically about it, making yourself some notes. I can't stress enough how valuable it's been for me to make use of my projects in Ravelry, in my Ravelry notebook, because I can put a lot of that kind of information. First of all, I've learned the hard way sometimes, but as soon as I start a project cast on my needles, I put it on my Ravelry page. I link the pattern name. I put in what brand yarn I'm using, link it if I can, and my needle sizes, because I am also multiple works in progress, and I have been known to borrow my needles for something more pressing. And then I come back to the needle, and I swear I probably did put a little tag there in the bag somewhere, tried to pin it onto the knitting that says size 7 needles, but the tag's gone, or it was a figment of my imagination. I attached it to begin with. So knowing where to restart again really is helpful. And I can't tell you, I spent a lot of time on Ravelry. I don't know how much time you guys are there, but if you spend any time in the main forums, particularly the techniques and the patterns column, I try to answer a lot of questions, and there are a lot of them that involve, here's a picture of my work, and what was I knitting? Because I've lost the pattern, or I didn't have the information. What's even harder is those who don't even put a picture and try to describe it, which then, you're stuck. But anyway, going back and reviewing your notes, keeping good notes when you finish a project too, to tell yourself, how much yarn did I actually use? You may have started with 600 gram skeins, but did you really use all of it? I have a gram scale, just a regular little kitchen gram scale for 20, 25 bucks or so. And that has been really helpful, because I'll weigh the remnants of yarn left over so that I'm recording pretty accurately the amounts I use. And because I knit a lot of things from stash, I think after hearing Suzanne's description of hers, I probably have 2 or 3 times that much because I've done a lot of traveling, and yarn makes a great souvenir because you can always squish another bag in your suitcase somewhere. And so now I have yarns that I bought 10, 20, 30 or more years ago. And so I'm constantly trying to match a project that makes a good use of it, and having my stash all entered in Ravelry. And mine was a big chore. It took me 2 months of an hour a day practically for 2 months of photographing and labeling and counting it up. But I have been so glad, except I also need to do one of those revamping, not quite as much. I'm just bringing bin by bin and seeing if all the stuff, because it seems to have migrated. I can't believe how many times I pull a skein out of this and that to do a little swatch to see if 2 colors work together well. And then it's still attached because I may want to look back at it more. So it ends up in one bin or the other's yarn. So it's not in the bin where it was. So, trying to relocate and put things back where they belong, that's kind of my ongoing chore for this winter time, I suppose. But getting your evidence collected about what has worked for you in the past, what kind of yardage has worked for you, because you may find, I'm fortunate from the standpoint of yarn usage. I'm short-waisted, so I don't need as much yarn to allot for body length. I also like to do a lot of my sweaters. I plan, especially if, I'm following a pattern somewhat closely. I won't say I will never follow a pattern exactly, but I have yet to, and I've been knitting a long time. And now I consider it a personal challenge not to, but in any event, if my yarn usage is going to be close, I know many designers do add a little overage, but I don't know how much they add as overage. And if I'm knitting a little more, compressed row wise or whatever that takes up a little more yarn, I want to see where I am. I like to hedge my bets. I start a lot of my sweaters provisionally. I do not cast on, especially with a lot of patterns being top down now. I do not cast on with my neck ribbing and start into the neck ribbing, because many patterns I'm finding these days have really wide necklines. And as we were talking about before, for warmth factor, I need the back of my neck and around my neck warm. I do not like these ones where I'm constantly having to shove my bra straps out of the way because they're wanting to show. Or, the other thing is I'm going to be looking for a shawlette or something to wrap around me because that's what I need warm. But in most cases, I'd rather start below the ribbing. And sometimes, even if a lot of patterns have any short row shaping in there to elevate the back of the neck, I even start below that part. And I leave all of that to do later on when I have at least the yoke done. And then I can go back and finish that off. Most of the time I leave it till near the end, because that gives me more leeway. If I run short of yarn and I do really want full sleeves, I'm tired of 3/4 length or whatever, I can do everything up to the cuffs and bands everywhere. And then I can use a contrasting color for those. Or I can, sometimes, you did buy one more skein, but it's a different dye lot, or you can get another skein now, but it's a different dye lot. If you use the odd dye lot skeins for the bands, the change in the stitch pattern from stockinette to ribbing or garter, whatever you're using for the borders, camouflages that. Or if all the borders are a nice complementary color, it looks like you planned that from the get-go. So you aren't stuck, because the conventional sweater pattern is going to have you make 2 fronts, a back, and 2 sleeves. And where do you run out of yarn? About this high up on that final sleeve. And then you're screwed, because you throw in another dye lot here, it's going to show. And, you would have to take it back all the way, take the other sleeve back the other way and start up approximately 2/3 up, or do the sleeves from the top down and work them, you know, a little bit on one, a little bit on the other until you run out. But that's a fair bit of redoing. So take a look at hedging your bets when you think it's going to be close. Now, I do have a quick little thing I want to diagram that I also use for estimating yarn usage, because something may tell you it needs so many skeins or so many yards, but sometimes you want to get a real ballpark figure. It may tell you, you know, and you want to adjust some length, etc. So let me just draw a quick diagram. And what I do is I do a very rough estimate on, okay, here's the tube for my sweater body. All I want, I'm not dealing with neckline. I'm not dealing with armholes at all. All I want is that square measurement. Let's, for the purpose of our just crude things, say that this sweater is going to be 50 inches around, all the way around, and it's going to be 30 inches tall. Okay, that's going to give us a grand total of 1,500 square inches of fabric. Now, we can do similar thing on the sleeves. And what's kind of cool is that, you know, typically a sleeve is shaped something like, it's a trapezoidal shape. It's wider at the top, narrower at the bottom. And you can plot out the math, the geometry formula to figure that out. But it occurred to me at some point, if you take another sleeve, because you're going to be doing 2 of these, and you flip it upside down to the other, just mentally. Okay, say this width is going to be 20 inches wide. We've got a 10-inch deep armhole, and this cuff is going to be 10 inches, you know, I'm talking about around 20 inches around 10 inches. We're going to add those up. That's going to make this 30 inches for the 2 of them. And say we got a sleeve that's 20 inches long. Okay, so up and down, we have 20. Now 30 times 20 means we're going to need 600 square inches for the 2 sleeves. So we need 2,100 square inches of fabric. When I potentially cast on for a sweater, say I want to do a bottom up sweater because I like my yoke shaping is easier to manipulate, what with decreases and patterning or whatever. And I won't always start it down at the very bottom. First of all, I said that I start provisionally above the ribbing in that case. I might also just knit up, okay, I've cast on provisionally, and I'll knit up 1 skein's worth. And then this 1 skein, say I get up about 5 inches deep. Okay, 5 times 50 is 250 square inches per skein. So 250, if I add up these 2, damn, I should have done the math first so I didn't have to puzzle it out. But anyway, get your handy calculator out, and this is going to be 2,100. It's going to be roughly about 8.5 skeins. So right away, if you have an amount that's close to that, you know you can do the whole sweater out of that. If you don't, then you can start thinking already other things about, okay, is there more of this yarn? Even if it's a different dialect, go get some more now if you don't want contrasting color. Or what else do you have in your stash that is the same weight, but will coordinate nicely to work with this. Do you want to throw in some color work into the yoke pattern, for instance? It gives you more possibilities. You're not painting yourself in corners as much as you possibly can get away with. So that always gives you a backup plan so that you don't spend tons of knitting and then get 95% done and realize it's not going to work and set out this, please somebody help me find this to figure it out. Leave yourself options as you go. I like to do a lot of my sleeves top down, even if I do the body bottom up. I like to pick up around the armhole and go down because I can try on much more easily. I can adjust the length to the amount of yarn, or I can double check that the math seems to be working out. It's tapering down what I feel like it should. When I'm getting down to within a couple of inches of the cuff, I can see, are there any elements of the pattern repeat row-wise I want to get completed, and then switch, because my ribbing often can be 1/2 inch or can be 4 inches. So if I have a really long pattern motif and starting another one is going to end up chopped off at a kind of unesthetically appealing point, I can just start my ribbing a little sooner, and then I can decrease stitches out evenly spaced. I'm not averse to having a few more stitches right above the ribbing of the cuff, because many patterns, if say top down or bottom up, you're going down, you're decreasing, and then you get down to your final count and you do your ribbing. I find that if it's a sweater I plan to pull over other things like shirts, I much prefer having about 1 inch extra ease in the forearm. So I may decide to taper out, instead of decreasing every 6th row, I may decrease every 7th row, which is much easier when you're doing it in the round, because you don't, all rounds you're on the right side. So you're not having to fiddle around with trying to decrease and keep to pattern on a wrong side row. And then have a little extra number of stitches, 5 to 10 extra stitches, then decrease those evenly spaced around on the row as you go into the cuff. Then it pulls in nice and snug, but it does have that ease, especially like for cardigans, where you're often pulling those over t-shirts or turtlenecks, regular shirts whatsoever. So I have the other thing I do want to add in is about this finishing off my necklines afterwards. And I've written quite a bit of stuff on Ravelry that you can find a lot of. If you go to my profile page, and Schrouder Knits is my Ravelry name, over on the right hand side there's one of the little icons is for posts, and it shows the current number of posts. If you click that, that shows all the posts I've made. And right now I'm in 85,000 or something like that. I don't expect you to read through them all, but you can actually put search terms in the tops, in the top as a search item, and look for the posts where I've been talking about things like short rowing necks or whatever it may be. But let me get a light colored one that shows it a little better. It's also on the sweater I'm doing. When I go to pick up back around underneath my provisional cast on, I like to add my short row shaping, and I do it in the rib almost all the time. I find that if I have a little stockinette, a crescent of stockinette to fill in the short rows, often it kind of bubbles out, especially when it's between a color pattern sweater yoke and ribbing, because the yoke, the color patterning tends to pull in a little bit. And then if you have plain stockinette, unless you drop down in needle size, at least 1 size, sometimes even 2, and then go right in the rib, you end up with this little bubble of fabric that makes you look like you have a funny little hump there. And especially if it's a bulkier yarn, if it's, you know, worsted weight, Aran weight, bulky weight yarn, you'll get more of a little bit of a bloop there. But if you immediately go into the ribbing, then that helps it collapse down and be a lot more form fitting. And I have a formula that's worked for me time and time again for my short row shaping. Let me get my paper again and roll this on up. I used to have a whiteboard, but I think when I officially quit teaching, I think I donated that to one of the schools. So this is kind of the next best that I could come up with. So I applaud your patience with me figuring it out and crinkling my paper. Oh goody, that's probably FedEx or somebody. Okay. Okay, what we're going to do is, this is a bird's eye view of the neck, divided into 4 equal quadrants. So however many stitches you have, divide it pretty close to in quarters. If you're off 1 or 2, 3 stitches, you know, that's not a big deal. But you have 2 sleeve sections, a back section, and a front section. Okay, everybody's with me so far. The idea is you're going to add most of your stitches, most of your rows, excuse me, in this back section. Let me grab a little different color here. You want more rows in the back section, and the side sections, the sleeve quadrants, is where they're going to taper out. Eventually, you want to stop your short rows in the front section. You don't want any to be in there, but you want the deepest bit in the back, and then it graduates out. So as you're going around your neck, you go across the back and stop at this quadrant marker. Turn, go back to the other quadrant marker. Now you're going to go back and forth and go a couple more stitches each time until you're down to the bottom of those side sections. And you can calculate it out how much deeper you want this part than the front part, because eventually you're going to go all the way around. By subtracting the shallowest portion of the rib from the deepest portion, and then you multiply that difference by your row gauge. So you do need to tally up what your row gauge is. I've got a lot more specific information about divvying that up, computing, and then how many stitches you have in here. And so I ended up many cases like going 3 more stitches each time and keeping it all in ribbing. And then once I was down to here, then I can turn and go all the way around. If it's a pullover, obviously if it's a cardigan that's split down the middle, you go back and forth just around the center portion there. And that's what I did on this one. This is called Blue Shimmer, and that's what I call it in my projects. And that's where the notes are more specific about the process of calculating that out. This I knit as a model for Wendy Keel's book, Poems of Color, golly, 1995, I think. So this is getting to be an old sweater, almost 30 years old. Originally, the directions said to put the short rows below the yoke, because it just goes down to just a little bit above the armhole level. And you were supposed to do all the short rows below the yoke. And I was rather brazen and didn't do it that way because, you know, being a model knitter, test knitter, I probably should have done as the pattern stipulates, but I had issues with doing it down there where my short rowing might have had problems with rowing out because my purl rows are looser, and I didn't know then about purling with a smaller needle when I'm working flat in stockinette. Plus being in this very light color, all of that would have shown up. I knew it was going to be photographed, so I opted to switch it out. I did check with Wendy first, and she did give me the okay. Maybe she could tell the desperation in my voice that I wasn't going to do it any other way. Oh, Suzanne's got the book pointing it out, the Poems of Color book. But I have used that extensively. I don't know if you can tell. Let's see on this one. If I do a turnaround, this one has more back than the front does. And another one I have handy. This, let's see, the sweater I'm wearing is a Jennifer Steingass pattern called Silver Forest, which of course doesn't look silver at all because I did it in totally different colors. And this is a Caitlin Hunter pattern. And there again, I have the ribbing in the back of the neck is much deeper than the ribbing in the front of the neck. I also wanted to mention too that this pattern I did rather than buying a bunch of different colors. This is with a Noro yarn, a self-striping yarn. I think I had like 2 skeins, and I don't even think they're the same colorways. But they had some colors in common, which isn't uncommon with Noro and some of the other self-striping yarns. So, and these were odd dye lots that I found on a sales shelf at a shop one time and had knocking around in the stash for a while. So sometimes finding great ways, and I'm just, you know, thoroughly in love with what it did contrasted against the green. There's no actual green in the variegated yarn, self-striping yarn, but then that's what makes it work, because if it also had this green in it, you'd lose where the pattern was. I kind of like it to open it up to some questions, because I'm sure some of you have run into some issues, and I'm hoping I can think fast enough on my feet to come up with some suggestions.
I would like you to talk a little bit more about like that Noro with the green, how a lot of times people will pick 2 skeins, like one that has like rainbow colors in it, and then they'll pick another skein that has a solid of one of those colors because they look really pretty together when you put 2 skeins together. Can you talk a little bit about that? How they do, why they don't work?
Well, they don't. There are probably some stitch patterns that it could work with, but if you have a really strong motif in the pattern, then you're going to lose that wherever that color comes up in the self-striping yarn, or, you know, a speckled yarn, a variegated yarn, then your eye just can't, you know, loses track of what the pattern's supposed to look like. Now, I could see doing something that's a very simple color pattern. There are some where it's just alternating stitches all the way through, and you very deliberately are using you know, even like a highly contrasting, some of those ones that, you know, how we've lovingly referred to, or not so lovingly referred to, as clown barf, where, man, it just looked like they threw the, you know, every pot of paint they had in there on it. And yet if you put that against black and do something really simple, just alternating stitches, and if your stitch count is an odd number, it automatically shifts on the next round to not be stacked up in vertical. Now you could do it in vertical, that would be fine too, but sometimes it looks more mysterious, I think, if it's constantly shifting back and forth from which color is there. About, golly, has it been 15 years ago or so? Let me dig into my pile. I got a card table handy, and of course nothing's on top at all.
Of course.
Because I had no idea which order they would be. Okay. Now, here is a sweater that does use Noro with a solid. And there are places where the colors are pretty close, but it's not the stranded patterning, because I realized that would not be a good issue, but I could see that clearly that the colors worked really well together. So what I opted to do was fairly narrow panels and striped it. And, you know, so maybe I've got 20 stitches on or 25, I forget what exactly. And I did 2 rows of one, 2 rows of the other, just alternating all the way through. And this one's garter stitch. But this is what the result, then all the stripes get joined together vertically. And I picked up and knit stitches along the sides of a panel and then up the sides of the next panel, and then did a 3 needle bind off between them to join. So I didn't have to sew things together. But the neat thing about doing all these panels is that instead of getting broad stripes across, I have narrower sections, but then that makes that color shift taller. And then it always ends up abutting next to something that's entirely different. This is only one colorway of that Noro yarn. This one happened to have a little bit of glitz in it. It was called Aurora. I'm sure it's out of production nowadays.
Very cool.
But it's just a soft kind of a gray denim-y slate blue. And that was from Elspeth Lavold, I believe, Summer Tweed, that I used as the contrast for that. And then the front borders, let's see, I need another one with stronger contrast. So it shows.
Now, this is your own pattern.
No, it's called Panel Jacket. It was a free pattern for quite a while. I'm not sure if it still is, by Carol Lapin, Lapin. But it's shown in on Ravelry. I believe I'm just in a kind of a pale purple color, solid.
Oh.
And what's kind of cool is the bottoms, each panel is a different length. So the center length is longer than the
cool.
sides, which is nice because the shoulders are square. They don't have any shoulder shaping to them. So usually that would droop down on the sides and your sides would be real long and the center would be high, but this kind of almost evens out due to that. And I did a whole bunch of things because I think she made her sleeves just one solid piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it was drop sleeved, and I fitted my sleeves in and I continued the sleeves with shaping. And it was actually the top segments that I made tapered out.
And you do that on a lot of your sweaters. Can you talk about that? How you do the shaping across down the top of the sleeve instead of underneath the sleeve?
Yeah, it happened somewhere along the line. It occurred to me that so often we do our decreases underneath the arms. Let me get my paper handy again. Which actually creates a diagonal line. And if any of you are familiar with triangles, the sleeve viewed when it's folded in half becomes a right angle. Okay, let me see if we can get this done. Okay, I'm not going to worry about the sleeve cap shaping, but a typical sleeve is shaped like this. The top part is horizontal. The bottom seam line becomes a diagonal because of the shaping, the decreases as you're going from armhole to cuff, or increases if you're going from cuff to armhole. So this line is always going to be longer than this line. That's just the nature of the math part of it. When I was talking about triangle, I was imagining that this is, you know, continued out to its natural pointy conclusion to make it a triangle. So what happens when you put your arm down with this extra length of fabric? You end up with a big wad of fabric on your armpit. What if instead we flip that and the bottom part of our sleeve, the underarm part of our sleeve, stays straight, no shaping, but you do your decreases at the top. So that lends itself to that, lengthens that line, and you don't end up with that cuff sometimes being a little bit shorter on the top of your wrist than it is on the bottom of the wrist. The reason most time patterns are shaped under the arm is because if you're going, especially if you're going in the round and you've got a pattern, you have a little bit of a jog. And most of the time you don't want to put that on the top of the sleeve where it's more obvious. But there are other times when you can get by with doing that and it's not an issue. Okay, here's an Aran sweater I designed for Knitters Magazine, oh golly, early 90s, I think. And this was totally done top down. This one I did start with ribbing and worked down because that was part of the whole concept. Once the ribbing was done, then you just continued on the saddles, which are, 12, 14 stitches down from the neck, and you knit on that till it's wide enough to go out to your shoulder. You did the other side as well. Then you picked up across the side of that, the middle of the back of the next stitches and across the other side. And you work that down flat, no shaping until you were at the underarm where you're going to do a little bit of cast-ons at each end to give an indented armhole. And then front, you do some shaping on the neckline and down to the underarm. And then you could either join in the round and work all the way down or work flat on back and front, whichever. But that left you a square set armhole, and you still had live stitches from the saddle that you had left a long time ago. So you pick up your stitches. Let me get this pulled around here. You pick up your stitches along the square edge, totally straight vertical edge of your armhole across the strap stitches, the shoulder strap stitches, and down the other side, and then back and forth. And in this case, I had done a provisional cast on at my underarm that is square. And so I took out the waste yarn, had those live stitches, and every time I knit back and forth, I knit together with an armhole stitch. So it's joining into the armhole too. And then as I was going though, I decided I would decrease on either side. I would keep this nice twisted braid stitch going down the top center. And my decreases for my stitches are alongside this. So I'm decreasing along the top center of my sleeve, separated by a couple of inches worth. But the result of that is a sweater where the sleeve goes out straight, but see how it has a more anatomical slope to it, so that even though I didn't officially do any shoulder shaping, I don't have a really floppy bunch of fabric, and I don't have nearly as much fabric underneath my arm as I might have had otherwise. And I've done that on other patterns. You saw the panel jacket before where I did that on the top, but there was no much, nothing much in the way of patterning. Here was a lace tunic that I followed most of for a pattern, but I opted on the sleeves to pick up and around the armholes, set kind of a set-in sleeve, and do a little short rowing there to make it a cap of a sleeve. But you can see I chose to continue the lace pattern. I centered one of the main lace patterns down the center of the sleeve, and then also at the underarm of the sleeve. And I opted just to keep the remaining stitches in plain stockinette. Get my shoulder seam back up here. And then it gradually tapers out. So that's where my decreases are, kind of halfway around each sleeve. So that way I didn't have decreases mucking up my lace pattern at all, because everybody knows how much fun that is, trying to keep your pattern straight and yet have it look decent. And I'm very happy with the results on that. I had a one or two pearl stitches on either side of that knit section, and then it just gradually tapers out.
Cool.
Just see a little bits of the of them, and eventually the knits totally disappeared, and then even the pearls disappeared. I ended up with just enough stitches to do feather and fan around the cuffs.
So this is thinking like a knitter and not thinking like a seamstress. Because
Yep.
if you think like a seamstress, you have to put that seam at the underarm. You don't see many shirts with a seam down the top of the arm. And I think that's
But
what happens is people think about seamstress patterns and they try to make the knitting fit the same plan.
and see, if I were a seamstress, I'd say, hey, why don't I change and put a band of something down here and then do my shaping on either, my other rest of the fabric, then that's going to be tapered out. And wouldn't that be kind of cool? Like if you were matching stripes, because they're kind of raying out on a
Right.
diagonal pattern. I some part of the idea was I haven't even talked about her yet. My favorite of all, my knitting godmother was Elizabeth Zimmerman. I ran across this book in 1974. This is a first edition. The price on it is $3.95. And you can tell it's been well used and it's still in print these days. If you have not read it, I strongly encourage this book and any of the others from Elizabeth Zimmerman. It was like, I read it and it was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Her concept of how the body is structured and how you're fitting fabric around it. And there was one, I don't know if I have it. I did bring it out. Her second book was called Knitter's Almanac, where she goes around the year and every month she has a different kind of a project. And I found that quite illuminating. And unfortunately, there's not a really big picture of it. But the March sweater that she made, she called Chainmail sweater. I'll see if I can hold it up. It's the one at the very top of the page in kind of a pinky coppery color. It's several colors in it. And on this one, she said when she does most all of her sweaters from the bottom up. And when she was doing the sleeve, she was doing the increases and doing this elaborate stitch pattern as well. And she said that the branching off of all these neat little twigs, she said, made such a beautiful pattern. She decided she didn't want to hide it. So she took it when she was finished and had washed it and did its regular block and realized how pretty it was. She said, I took a steam iron to it and forced it to put that on the back portion of the sweater and force the shaping a little bit different. And she says, that's the way I sewed it in, because I realized, well, it was so pretty. It needed to be admired by somebody standing behind you in the ski lines. And, I think it sets the little balls a rolling. I strongly encourage you, any of her books, and then the Barbara Walker books, and probably the one most pertinent, particularly to sweaters, is called Knitting from the Top Down. It was just Knitting from the Top, and it's been also republished. It came out also about the same time. I bought it in 1977. And I think one of my kids was tracing their hand. And they're now in their 40s. So this was a while ago. But her concept of how things could be shaped going from the top down and seamless for the most part. Now, sometimes there is some aversion to going seamless, because if you're doing a top-down sweater, you're doing the front and the back and the sleeves. And if it doesn't turn out right, look at how much more you've got to rip out than if you just have a back or a front that you maybe can clearly see is not working. However, sometimes when things are in pieces, you can't really put them together very easily to tell. And I do have some safeguards, because I agree, you're investing a lot more in the knitting. And again, one of my favorite methods for knitting top down is that I almost always, when I think I'm getting close to the dividing line for the underarm, say about an inch away or so, stop, put your stitches on a holder. I'm currently using waste yarn, but I just put in an order for these long flexible tubing. It's called Try It On tubing because it actually slips over the end of your needle and you really jam it in there so it thins out the it faces the bluntness of the edge of the tubing, and you just slide your stitches, and it's like 60 inches long or 72 inches long, whatever. So then you can, at that point, I will actually wash and block what I've got, because sometimes it needs that. When that happens, that's when your fabric truly relaxes. You can see, oh, I'm actually another ½ inch longer or even an inch longer. I'm ready to divide now, or I'm not as far as I thought I was. Oh, this is a little tight. Maybe I need some more increases. Is it already too tight? Maybe my color stranded knitting that I was, anytime you're thinking, will this block out, is a good time to wash and block it and find out. Because if you leave those questions still waffling around in your mind, they tend to undermine your progress. After a while, you start finding yourself not working on it quite as much. And you get, what Suzanne was saying earlier about those projects, kind of wagging their fingers at you. Find out now. Yeah, sure, it's going to be a bummer if you find out not working at all, but I'd certainly rather rip back, 5, 6, 7, 8 inches of knitting than keep on plugging away and then have it just, and the only, and the problem was up here to begin with. Now you can also play around with changing the shaping a little bit. Sometimes the size you chose might have been fine as far as the bust measurement, but then you look at the upper arms going to measure after you divide. Maybe you need a little bit more. Maybe what they've got is way too much. I try and look at those things before I even choose the pattern. I want to look at both the underarm measurement and the bust measurement. Because sometimes I found lately that I do better if I choose a size smaller, because my shoulders aren't super broad. And I'll start with a smaller size, and then I'll cast on more stitches at the underarm. That way I get a better fit through my shoulders. And then I still need, that extra for the bust measurement. So I cast on there. And I can also move the dividing points, instead of right, at where the pattern says, if you move towards the body a couple stitches, that'll assign more stitches to the sleeves. If you move towards the sleeves, it'll assign more stitches to the body. You can jockey around there quite nicely. And even with a raglan being very, very definitive where the sleeve and body sections connect, if you move those stitches, that division, a couple stitches in either direction, it's at your armpits. Nobody can tell that you fudged and gave a few more to one portion than you did to the other. As long as the pattern stays centered, you're golden. So that gives you a lot more leeway. And then I might block again as I'm getting close to sleeve length. Because especially if I noticed that there was a real settling of the fabric from the yoke, then I might want to double check on that. But I can also sometimes, I'll take my row gauge. In fact, I actually almost always do take my row gauge from that blocked fabric and plot out how many inches do I want from the underarm to just above where I'm going to start my ribbing. How many rows does that compute to? So if I want it, 16 inches before I start my ribbing times my, 10 rows per inch, that I know I've got 160 rows. I need to get rid of 30 pairs, divide that in, always round it up because I'd rather end up with the extra stitches than that I can decrease evenly spaced around. Before I get shift into the cuff. So I can keep making modifications as I go. And therefore, hit the mark where I want. And then I still have the leeway too, that if after wearing for a while, the sweater does grow, most of the time I've been pretty diligent about checking all those things so I don't get too many unpleasant surprises, but I suppose it's always a possibility. I can more easily rip back and shorten things if I should need to, but very seldom have I needed to, since I do that washing and blocking in progress.
I want to share your Ravelry page. I'm going to put it up here, and then maybe you can talk about it, okay?
Okay.
And
Well,
I can go to the different areas that you talk about. So this is Joan's. She's Schrouder Knits on Ravelry. And as she said before, over here are her posts, which you can go to those posts. And let's say you want to search for a topic. You click on those posts. Come on, pull up. They're not coming up. Oh, here we go. It was slow. It's because there's so many. Up here, see the search? So you put the shorts, let's search, let's put short row shaping, which I'm sure she has a ton on. But you could search her post and then you get all the posts on her short row shaping. Now she is, I'll talk for a minute and then she can talk about it. Joan is one of the persons of Ravelry. And they did that, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
March 2019. Wow, eons ago.
Yeah. So she was chosen as a human of Ravelry. And so they did her profile here. And I love that sweater. That's one of my favorite sweaters that she's done. But they talk about Joan here. Oh, there's this sweater. And you didn't tell us about the braided edging. Maybe you
I started to, and then I got sidetracked. I sidetracked myself.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. But she has all of her projects here. So she has 165 projects, and you can go to each one, and she has her project notes for each one.
Some more so than others. Oh, I noticed I never finished that. Wrote that one finished, and my daughter-in-law is wearing it for Christmas, so I never. This is
the one she's wearing right now.
Yeah.
And so she shows about, and look how she did her decreases even in her short row ribbing on the back neck. She did some decreases here.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Because I could try it on and see that the neckline was going to be larger than what I wanted, so that I could shape it out.
So we can go back to here. She has also, I interviewed her, which if you haven't seen that, you can watch. It was a great interview. You can also, she has a list and she's Raveler number 6465. So she's been on there since the early days of Ravelry, but she also has my personal tutorial links, not videos. Here is, in this post right here, post 17 of.
It's called, I think it's Fiber Arts.
It's in this
forum.
Yeah, Fiber Arts tutorials. So post 17 down here, she lists links to all of her favorite things.
Videos that I've found that describe things the way that I would describe. I always think I'm going to go back there instead of repeat everything I've said, but then I forget to do that. But I have them fairly well categorized according to topics. Of course, once in a while, Jeff Shaw isn't probably going to mean anything to you guys where it does to me, but I try to organize them alphabetically according to topic.
So she made it easy to find those rather than trying to remember that thread. It's on her personal page here. If you go to Schrouder Knits, it's down here at the bottom. You can click on that link. And I've gone and looked at those things. You know, it's very helpful to me too. Joan is all about sharing her knitting skills. So anything you want to say about this page, Joan, you can carry on, and then we'll go back to your sweater. We'll talk about that braided edge.
Okay, I did want to mention that I did a lot of those links to videos and so on before I knew much about your videos, and Roxanne is the other person who does a lot of, and between the two of you, I can't tell you how many times I see one of your videos and I say, I channeled that to you. And I mean, I'm being totally kidding, because I know that we didn't speak about it at all, but that's exactly the kind of video showing the sequence and the order and just the little finesse details. So I should have a whole lot more links to your stuff in there than I do. But I just wanted to give that a plug, because I can't tell you how many times I've just said that and said, if I were any way decent at or even interested in making videos, yours are the videos I would have made.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to close this. Okay. Let's go back to your sweater with the braided edge. Let's talk about that. The 2-color braided edge.
Okay. Where did I put it that fast?
It's the panel sweater.
Well, I know which one it is. I just didn't know where I threw it. Okay, on the other side of the computer. Yeah, it is I-cord. It's 2 strands of I-cord that you knit. You knit several rows of 1 and attach, and then several rows of it unattached. Then you drop it. And I found it easier. I got these ultra short, like 9-inch needles, circular needles that are meant for knitting socks or something. And I found those handy because they didn't twist up quite as bad. But I attached it, I think, for 3 ridges, and they did 7 rows unattached. And then knit the other color, 3 rows attached, 7 rows unattached, and twisted them around as I was going, which meant my yarns twisted. So it's a, kind of thing as you're doing it. But I really like the effect. So every once in a while, I put it on a poncho one time too. So I have done it a couple of times. Then it's sort of like giving birth. You have to wait a long time before you're willing to do it again. You have to
forget about it first.
Let the memory dull just a little bit.
Forget the pain. Exactly. Just remember the joy.
Yeah, I have to show off this beautiful, beautiful cloisonne button that a dear friend gave to me. It's got can you see that? It's a swan.
Yes. Isn't that
and
cool?
She gave this to me, and I had it mounted to make it into a stick pin. And she gave it to me at the event where I had found these yarns. And it was just like, oh my God, this is so meant to be. So I'm afraid it's so glary, it's so shiny that it's hard to get the full effect of it, but it just goes perfectly on this.
If anybody has any questions they want to ask Joan, raise your digital hand so you pop up to the top of the screen. And while you're thinking about your question you want to ask, Joan, can you talk about swatching before you knit a sweater?
Oh, yes. I am a pretty strong proponent most of the time. Anytime I don't know a yarn, I've got to get acquainted. I consider it the dating period. And I want to swatch it to, first of all, the key thing is getting gauge. But I also want to see how it handles. What does it feel like at that gauge? Yarns have an optimum gauge at which they perform. Some have a wider range that they will do it. Others, it's pretty narrow. And unfortunately, yarns, even if you're following the yarn chosen by a designer, sometimes they're not always choosing it under the best circumstances. Sometimes they figured out ways to make it work, but I really listen to what my gut tells me about it. Besides doing the gauge, and generally you want to do 6 inches or so, because you want to only measure the 4 inches in the center. And row gauge to me is as important as stitch gauge. Yes, you can, knit a little longer, knit a little shorter. But if your row gauge is dramatically off, that tells me that other things may be affected too. And what you have to look at is there shaping in this sweater? If the sweater says something like, increase every other row or decrease every other row or every sixth row or whatever, that rows is based on getting that row gauge. If your row gauge is considerably different, your shaping is going to be faster or slower than it needs to be. So you really do have to watch that. The other thing that I see is that a lot of gauges are written on the loose side of what I would knit particular yarns, and that does open up more possibility that the fabric is going to stretch. Because in knit fabric, if you followed one row of knitting, it's this wavy yarn, and you can pull it up, and gravity pulls it up, and then that's going to pull it in, but it's going to grow down. And that's the nature of knit fabric versus having a woven fabric. And if it's already on the loose end, then couple that with, okay, the fiber doesn't have any memory to it. You're dealing with alpaca or with cotton or silk, then chances, and you're knitting it loosely. And there's no support through the shoulders. You're doing a round yoke or a raglan that has no shoulder seams there to give any support. You're begging for your armholes to end up down around your waistline, possibly. So give it a little test. When you wash and block it, I sometimes do give it a little lengthwise pat out. How much is this going to give? Because as soon as I hold it up and wear it in a vertical position, that's what it's going to do, right? So if my row gauge is a little bit on the short side, in other words, I'm getting another row per inch, half a row per inch than what they are, that often I can smooth out, because that's what gravity is going to do, especially with the weight of the lower part of the sweater pulling on it. But if I'm already, it calls for 6 rows to the inch and I'm only at 4.5, that's real dicey. Now, sometimes you can compensate. I've been knitting some fingering weight sweaters. Fingering weight always to me meant 7 to the inch. But I've been doing color stranded yokes, and color stranding has less stretch to it. And so because it has less stretch this way, it also seems to have less stretch this way. And so that seems to, and because most of it's up around the shoulders, it does seem to support a little better. So I've become more comfortable with at least trying it. And then I'm documenting or, watching to see how things are. And so far, I haven't had too many disappointments. And then especially like on these, fairly standard top down, all the rest of the sweater is just plain. So I don't have any additional weight at the bottom. So what weight there is up at the top, and that's where it's giving the support. So I'm willing to trust it that far. But if I had to, I guess I could, pull the neck in a little bit more, and that would pull the whole thing up if I found it was drifting down around my waistline.
Well, I don't see anybody else with a question besides me. Maybe they were zoning in on me and sending me their questions telepathically. Oh, here, Laura has her hand up.
I actually have a lot of questions.
Oh.
So when you're doing your short row shaping, what method do you prefer? What do you feel is the most invisible?
I learned wrap and turn just because that was the only one out there 30, 40 years ago with Elizabeth and with Barbara Walker. Excuse me a minute, I get drippy nose syndrome here. And I can make that invisible. I've tried the other methods. I'm doing a sweater now as a test knit, and it called for German short rows. And I kind of gritted my teeth and did them. I know other people are just totally devoted to them. I've done yarn over short rows. I've done Japanese. I can make all of them work, but for me, good old wrap and turn is as easy as anything, and I can make it invisible. And the trick,
can I add my 2 cents to that too? I
Oh,
agree. I agree 100%. I think all of the others are just popular because they have a different name.
well, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, your video on it was one of the ones that I was saying hip hip hooray, because it does it in a slightly different manner, the actual wrapping. You do exactly like I do. I do not move the yarn until I've slipped the stitch. I move the yarn as few times as possible. So if I move the yarn first, then slip the stitch, then take the yarn back, sometimes then it has to be moved again, depending on whether you're going to knit and purl after you've turned. And I just move it one time in those cases instead of 3 times. Sometimes it has to be moved twice. But if you slip beforehand, I find not only is it quicker to do, it's less steps to remember, but I think it also works better because when you do that kind of a figure 8 thingy around it, I think that actually twists a little bit when you pick it up and knit it. And sometimes that torques the stitch you're knitting it with. And then that's why
Exactly.
people are not happy about it. So if you
Exactly.
simplify it, it also solves that issue and is pretty invisible.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
I'm glad we agree on that. I
Yeah.
did so much experimenting on that, just that one little thing. And I did a
Mhm.
ton of research. I looked up everywhere what people
Mhm.
recommended for wrap and turns and which way slip versus not slip. And I felt my way was better.
I think 90% of the videos that I see involve slipping the stitch first. I think yours was one of the first ones I came across that did not do that. I said, yay.
But also all of the other, I've done extensive swatching, comparing all of them, and you can make all of them look really good.
And
So
I
it's
agree.
whichever one you feel comfortable with. And I personally like wrap and turn.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree that, I know Roxanne Richardson also has done a little demo with one big swatch that has all the different methods, and she came up with the same thing. You can make, any of them can look good. So it's use whatever's comfortable for you. I always agree with experimenting and trying new things. Oh, I wanted to get back to about gauge swatch. My swatches tell me so much more than just gauge. In addition to finding out that, I want to see with the hand of the fabric if it feels like it's got some body to hold some shape, particularly for a sweater. But also I want to go ahead and practice the stitch pattern in it. So once I've done my 6 inches or so, I just carry on and start adding in the stitch pattern. Is it something I enjoy doing? Because sometimes, man, some of them are so convoluted. I think I'm never going to survive, knitting the whole thing of this.
Exactly.
If it's just one panel, okay, maybe I can make do. How does it look in my yarn? If my yarn is a little fuzzy, does the stitch pattern show up well enough?
Do you enjoy the feel of the yarn going through your fingers?
Yeah,
If it
well,
doesn't feel good, are you going to want to knit a whole sweater fighting that yarn?
yeah. And sometimes maybe the yarn can stand, being pre-washed. There've been a few yarns that really, do better after that. But I also want to test, are the directions correct, or am I understanding the directions correctly? Am I able to get my pattern to look like what they mean to? Or is there a mistake in the pattern, or am I misunderstanding or misinterpreting one of the symbols? I much prefer charted patterns if I can. Sometimes I'll even look around if it's a stitch pattern I know I've seen before in another pattern that has it charted. I'll go grab that one to use instead of working just only off text, because my eyes, I can see the picture of a pattern much easier than I can follow all the little bitty text when it's all jumbled together, especially if it's a fairly complex pattern. But and then the washing it, I sometimes will test out several different ways of washing it, particularly say if it's a superwash wool, because while it may be feasible to do it machine wash, how does it look afterwards? If it looks like something the cat drug in because it's already pilling, then I'm going to at least try and hand wash it for a while and preserve it as long as possible. But, you know, super washes are different animals because some of them seem to need quite a bit of time in the dryer to snap back, because a superwash basically has had the barbs on the wool fibers that would cause felting. It's had those stripped off or shellacked down. You don't know which, because they never tell you which way it was. But that means it's slippery, slidey. It doesn't grab hold of its neighbor and kind of protect the structure of the stitch fabric. So I usually, you know, in those cases, I'll start it with a hand wash, hand and flat dry. But if it grows like crazy, then I'll get it wet again. And then I'll toss it in the dryer for a bit and see how it is. And if it's not too beat up looking. And then I may, for the, you know, especially if it's something I'm going to send to my granddaughters, I may run it through the machine wash and machine dry, because in case it runs that way.
This is your swatch you're talking about.
This is my swatch. I want to test. I want to test all those things on it. And if there's color work in there, I want to test the colors together. I tell you, these colors, putting this together was a really fun experiment. You know, I have been shopping my stash for about the last, oh God, like 5-6 years. And so, you know, because I've got such a large stash, I often do have things that go together, but sometimes there are things you don't initially think you're going to. And I had like 4 skeins of this yarn, and I know if you can see, it's a hand-dyed yarn. There's little bits of navy in it. It's plummy and but almost golden tones to it too. So I started pulling stuff out that I thought might work. And the one that surprised me the most was this. This is the background of my yoke. It's kind of a cream lavender. And I thought it would be good enough contrast to use as the light color. And then I have a little bit of chocolate brown. This is really deep, you know, 70 proof chocolate there that just is the very tops of the scallops and the very bottoms of the scallops. And then the main portion of the patterning is this other hand-dyed yarn that is really just a darker combination of this. But if it had been against this, there wouldn't have been enough contrast for the pattern to show. But against this one, ta-da. So I did some swatching on top of my swatch as well. And shoot, I was going to bring yarn and needles because I wanted to show a way of you know, faux circular swatching. Basically, you cast on, say, 30 stitches across your circular needles. And when you get to the end of the row, you slide everything back. You don't turn. And then you loosely strand this big long loop across and you knit across again. And you keep doing that. And you end up with all these strands. And when I used to teach classes, halfway through the class, I swear to God, there were at least 10 people who've taken scissors and cut up all through those because they couldn't stand all the strands. And sure enough, you can do that, but you can never rip that out and reuse it. And I'm, you know, because I'm working from stash, I don't want to waste my yarn to do that. And, you know, for a long time, I just gritted my teeth and put myself up to that. But I've since learned a cool little trick, and I wish I could remember who, where, or how I learned it. But if you make that loop behind, you know, spread out your stitches, and if you make that loop behind 3 times the width, you can use the loop itself to knit across. And meanwhile, the tail is back here still waiting. So then when you slide the work back, you can knit with the tail again, or, you know, with a ball yarn going. And you may have just a, you know, a 3, 4, 5 inch loop at the end, which is ever so much neater with all these strands behind.
Very cool.
So I really like that trick, but I'm testing that. And then I usually invite people to hang on to the swatch, even after you've done all the washing, after you've done everything, hang on to that swatch. Don't rip it out yet. You can always reuse it at any point in the sweater. But there are often times later on where I'm deciding, oh, how am I going to do my shoulder joins? Can I get those patterns? Will it work to do a 3 needle bind off if I short row. Can I try my short rows across that swatch? What about if this is going to be a cardigan? What's my pickup rate down the front? I can knit, pick up stitches along that front and actually knit a button band. I can even try a couple of buttonholes in it. I can take that swatch with me to go shop for buttons and not have to drag the whole sweater along. So that swatch just becomes ever so much more useful. And I think the more uses we find for it, the better we feel about doing all that extra work. So make it work for you, and then, rip it out towards the end and use it, especially if you need it. Some people like keeping their swatches and document them someplace if they'd like to. I almost always do rip mine out at some point and reuse it in the project, because I'd rather end up with a full skein left over out of the 4 skeins I had with this originally. And then these, I've just got the portions because I only had a single skein of each, but I've got it documented. And one of these days I'll probably do some kind of a shawlette or scarf that then I obviously could wear with this sweater or any other.
Okay, I'm going to show the full screen. And I'm going to say, we're going to cut this now, although we can continue later. But did you all enjoy, Joan?
Oh, sure. Put them on the spot.
Very
Here,
nice.
I loved it.
I'll
Yes.
close my eyes and
This
plug
was
my ears.
awesome, wasn't
It
it?
was fantastic. It really was.
Yes, thank you.
So what if we invite her back in a few months?
I like that idea.
I like that idea.
And you can think about your questions. And when she comes back in a few months, you'll already be acquainted with her and have a better idea of what you'd like to ask her. Okay.
And feel free to suggest some topics, because
Yes.
I can go a number of different ways. I can certainly continue with sweaters about, more details about fitting, or, raglans versus round yokes versus whatever. Or, if you want to go into types of stitch patterns, or how to blend shaping and stitch patterns, or, whatever. Think about
She can be our guru for our group.
She's open to that. That would be wonderful.
Have a Q&A.
Yes. Okay. So, and maybe, John, do you travel anymore? Do you do retreat? Now I'm putting you on the
I
spot.
haven't done any because, golly, almost 10 years now, because I don't have access to my handouts anymore.
But you would, we don't care if you don't have access.
Okay. I could possibly do that. It would have to be, when COVID is
Right.
pretty much a thing of the past, because
Yeah.
we have to be extra cautious here.
Yes, we'll talk about it, because that would be awesome.
I would
We'd
love
love
it.
to all meet you in person.
I
Yeah.
could bring 6 suitcases of sweaters.
Yes, you could. We could all try them on.
Trunk show.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to let you go. You can stay here if you want, or you can go on your merry way. We're going to start wrapping up the guild meeting. Now, next week is our social knitting. And what I'm going to do this year, because we've had such awesome presentations during our Zoom, and spending more time with the presentation and not having to rush it, why don't we do our sharing of our knitting, our sharing projects during social knitting? Okay, so next Saturday, same time and same place, same Zoom address, is social knitting. And as I said before, I'm going to try to have the lady that owns Atenti Bags on here. It's not cemented yet. If not, I'll get somebody else. So we'll have a little entertainment for our social knitting, but mostly it'll be about sharing our projects, our works in progress, and just socializing and having a good time. Is there anything anyone else would like to say other than thank you, Joan? Thank you. That was amazing.
That was awesome. Where'd she go?
Yeah, okay. She knows she's loved. That was cool, wasn't it?
The only thing I caught that I wanted to say, because I can't type right now, but Luann was asking about the name of the tubing. the try-on tubing. I don't know if you got that answered for her.
Yeah,
someone
it's
did.
over in the chat.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. And the book, this is one of my all-time favorite books, Poems of Color. It's a Stickney tradition. And this is actually the sweater that she knit right here.
Oh,
Isn't that
that's
cool?
a fantastic book. We have that in the library too, and it is
Yes.
fantastic. It's fun. A lot of the books in the library, I just like to read them.
And it's
Not-
just reading the story here.
Yeah.
It's awesome too, about the history of them. And I will tell you, the book, the Knitting Without Tears, the Elizabeth Zimmerman book, Elizabeth Zimmerman and Barbara Walker are both fun just to read.
Exactly.
The way they use, you know how you enjoy reading Mark Twain because of his use of the language, his use of the words. Barbara Walker and more so Elizabeth Zimmerman, the way they talk, you can just read it like a story when they're talking about knitting. And Elizabeth Zimmerman doesn't write patterns. She writes it how, you know, she'll, like when she talks about making a turtleneck, she'll say knit one, purl one, or knit two, purl two ribbing until you're sick of it, and then bind off. You know, and it just makes you laugh out loud. I read these when I'm laying in bed, like you would read a book. They're well worth reading, and we do have them in the library and you can check them out. So Judy, let's have our drawing.
Okay,
you
let me
ready?
see if I gotta share my screen.
Okay,
Can you see it?
Not yet.
Oh, hang on. How about
Great.
now?
there
Yeah.
we see it.
Oh, look at all those.
Here's our Wheel of Fortune. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Got everybody's name.
Alice.
Alice.
You.
Liz.
Now,
Okay.
I'll tell you, Alice, that, thank you, Judy. So you're going to email her the gift certificate? So one of the things that I'm trying to do for the social knitting, one of the things that we decided at our board meeting is we're going to try to get different vendors to do presentations at the social guild meeting, the third Saturday of the month. And Wild Fibers is one of the places that I'm contacting. So Alice, I'll let you know. Is Alice still on here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, I'll let you know if and when I get her for the Saturday social knitting, because you might want to save your gift certificate till then, because I'm going to have her show the yarn in her store.
Oh, nice. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Barbara, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. I found the booties. Can you see that?
Yeah,
It's Gina Michelle, easiest baby booties ever. And it's a free pattern.
okay. And they're also on Ravelry. I think, who else found them? Katie, didn't you find them on Ravelry?
I did.
That's a
I
different
did.
booty. I
It
think that's
was a different one. I found it and it had a button on it, so
Oh,
it
okay.
wasn't quite the
Not
same.
the same, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but any booties will work, and you know, you can just go to Ravelry and put in baby booties, and you can, you know, you can do a pattern that you pay for. And speaking of paying for patterns, you know, I know people like free patterns, but you know, the person who wrote the pattern, you know, most patterns are just a few dollars. You know, give them the few dollars. I know I appreciate it when people purchase my patterns. I feel like it's a compliment to me that they like my work, you know, and the $3 or $4 or $5 or whatever it is doesn't make a huge difference, but when you add them all up together, yes, they do. It's very nice.
And if you get a free pattern from a designer, then you could go on their site and buy something from them. So it kind of evens out a little bit.
Exactly, because they did put effort in to put that on there. doesn't just
The other-
magically happen.
The other thing I'd say about if you get free patterns, make sure you post about the projects you make from them. Post them on your social media, post them on Instagram, make a Ravelry page so that other people can see how the pattern worked for you and put your comments, because that helps the designer get more traffic as well.
Exactly, exactly. Anything else anybody wants to talk about? Did you enjoy that?
Yes.
It was really
Don't
good.
you love her? Don't you love her? I met her for the first time, I think about in 2012. No, I think it was 2008 that I met her for the first time, and we just clicked. And we've been social friends, and I met her quite a few times in person at conventions. I've had dinner with her, and she's just a nice lady. I like her.
Suzanne, was she a math teacher in her former life?
She was an RN.
Oh, an RN. Well,
Yes,
that's
she's
another
an
connection
RN.
with you then.
Exactly. Okay, I'm gonna let you all go. This is recorded, and I will make a link to it on YouTube, a private link, and I will send it out to the guild members. And I'll also put a notice in there about paying your dues and signing up on the sign-in sheet. Okay,
Yeah, fill in the form.
okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Suzanne. Thank you,
Suzanne.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Suzanne.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.